Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network. The first round of the playoffs is long over. The second round officially in the rear view. And Worm, we have our first car headed to the championship 4 in Phoenix. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor and my co-host on this fine program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, just like we drew it up 4 or 5 weeks ago, if we could figure out which car was going to put together the dominant run, be able to secure their position in the Final Four, it was no doubt going to be the 22 Penske Pennzoil Ford to try and get there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, right after the Roval, I was like, well, Logano clearly it's going to be the first car in. It's going to take an obvious DQ that was coming for the 48 car, and then what turned out to be a probably 10th or 12th place car is able to punch his ticket to the final round of the playoffs. I'm just not shocked it's Joey that pulls this off.
No, if there was going to be one driver of the final 8, it was going to be Joey Logano by hook or by crook to find the world's longest sustaining fuel cell, or whatever we want to call it, to try and bleed as much gas out of the Ford because they have lower drag than some of our other OEMs.
That's what happens when it's the window of opportunity that opens for cars that have been that aren't race winning. There's no way Kyle Larson wins a Fuel Fest. There's no way Chris Bell with a dominant car all day wins a Fuel Fest. You could have seen it with Denny Hamlin, but that car had damage from earlier in the day and not a lot of speed. If you were going to say someone was going to win in a Fuel Fest, you'd have to say 1A would clearly be Joey Logano. I would say you could also give maybe an outside chance to Chase Elliott. However, he had a fast enough car.
I was going to go Austin Dillon. If someone's winning a Fuel,
yeah, that is true. Austin's done that a few times. But there's just too much speed in these other race cars to take that chance. And I know there are a lot of people out there, ourselves included, holding a Bell ticket. But the car was just too fast to take that chance. They had already scored 19 stage points, and they knew when they pitted a lap later that they were going to be fighting cars to stay out, or eventually be racing cars that stayed out. But they were going to leave with 50 something points anyway, and you cannot leave that many points on the table to chance on a fuel run. Whereas if you're Joey Logano and you're in a place where you might not think you deserve to be in because of the way you got into the round of 8, well, this was probably his only chance to win. And kudos to that team for getting it done. There was not a moment in that run where I thought Logano was going to run out of fuel. I'll be sure of that. I did not know if Chris Bell was going to get there in time, but ultimately Paul Wolf playing chess, I guess you could say, it was his only option. So maybe you can't say that, but all in all, 22 team moves on. And here we are with not even the favorite. He's the only guy locked in, and he's not even the favorite to win the championship.
That's the craziest part about it, and I think it speaks volumes about the dynamic we could see him play. Stage 1, though, for today's show, all about the championship reset, and we'll get into the 8 drivers still vying for the championship. As we mentioned, Joey Logano, the only one that we know officially will be racing for a championship in Phoenix in early November. Stage 2 will break down all things Homestead-Miami, Miami Homestead, whatever the hell they're calling it, for the Wireless Talk 400. I don't know. We don't get paid by the sponsor, so I don't care if I get the name of the race right. In stage 3, since there's not as much to teach you guys with 3 races to go in the season, we'll talk a little best bet and try and get on the positive side of the ledger after a little bit of misfortune, despite immense closing line value last weekend in Vegas. So when we hit the reset button, we know Joey Logano, he's clinched. You mentioned the fact he's plus 3.25 to win the whole damn thing. And when we begin to go through the rest of the pecking order, the other 7 drivers, Christopher Bell, 42 points clear. He's listed at 5-2. Kyle Larson, 35 points clear, 5-2. William Byron, 27 points to the good. He's 5-1. Denny Hamlin got a little work to do, 27 points short, 22-1. Tyler Reddick, 25-1, 30 points short. Ryan Blaney, 47 points short, 22-1. And then there's Chase Elliott, 53 points with plenty of work to do at 40-1. Werme, it's like we talked about all season long, given the unpredictable nature of the playoff format, that if there were certain drivers that were out there, the best prices we were going to get was going to be late in the season. And here we are. I mean, William Byron, maybe you could have had an 8 during the season. You weren't going to get much better with Kyle Larson or Christopher Bell. Joey Logano, of course, he was the outlier where you could have had a substantially better price than what the market's going to offer now. But for Denny Hamlin, Tyler Reddick, Ryan Blaney, and Chase Elliott, better's delight, boys and girls. Here we are. Best numbers you're going to find, and numbers that are only going to drift further if one of those 4 doesn't win this weekend down there in South Florida.
Yeah, I think it's important to break down these drivers based on the tracks that we have left in this particular round to see if they'll make it to the final. You know, they're very different tracks at Homestead and Martinsville. You know, you look at Chris Bell or Joey Logano, he's already in. So do I like Joey Logano at plus 325? Hell no. I think you'll get a better price once you actually see.
I mean, that number's got to go to 4.5 to 1, at least theoretically, if the favorites are there. Now, if Christopher Bell and Kyle Larson are enjoying Joey Logano in Phoenix, we're going to look back on this and go, oh, plus 3.25 was a little bit of a steal for the 22.
Yeah, I think if it's like Hamlin, Byron, Elliott, Bell and Larson, I feel like are the key guys, and then probably throw Reddick in there. Those guys would be the favorite over pretty much anyone, including Logano, if the others aren't there. So we're going to skip Logano. Bell can win at both tracks. We've seen it happen at Martinsville. Obviously, last year, Bell wins this race at Homestead. He's also 42 points to the good. I anticipate him qualifying well, scoring stage points in both stages here this week, and really giving himself a nice cushion going into a place like Martinsville, where I wouldn't say he's going to be one of the favorites to win, but he has done it in the past. Kyle Larson, his best chance to win is at Homestead. I know that he's won at Martinsville, has won at Martinsville in the past, but that's usually based on some sort of tire strategy. Larson, but also I anticipate him scoring stage points, both stages this week, kind of solidify himself as just, don't DFL at Martinsville,
which we've seen the 5 do before. And I mean, we saw it last year at Homestead when he somehow found a way to turn it into an obstacle course, something that we had never seen from a driver that talented at this particular track.
Absolutely. And then Byron, both tracks, obviously, I think a little bit better chance at Martinsville, but he's been super consistent here at Homestead. Then Hamlin, obviously, Denny Hamlin can win anywhere. This is not news to anyone. Reddick, very much so, needs to win at Homestead, in my opinion.
Yeah, he better drive his car into victory lane this week, because I'm not going to like his chances in a must-win scenario to take home the checkered flag in Martinsville.
Correct. That's why you're seeing a longer price on Tyler Reddick, even though if he does get through to Phoenix, I would make him the second favorite behind Bell if Bell makes it. If Bell doesn't make it, I would make Reddick the favorite if he does. So then on to Blaney. Gosh, he can win at both tracks. We've seen it. I think he had race-winning cars both times last year, or at both races. Clearly at Martinsville, one of the more dominant performances I think we saw last year was that 12 car at Martinsville, and probably the fastest car here at Homestead. The crazy thing is we just haven't seen that same speed out of Blaney this year. I know we only saw it one time last year coming into these races at Charlotte, but we didn't see that this year. I think we saw a glimmer at Kansas, but we don't know what he really had last week. I think he had a great car, even though it was a backup. And then if you go back to Darlington, when we thought he was going to be very competitive, he only made it 2 laps before him and Truex got together. And
he had a fast car, though, for those first 2 laps.
First 2 laps. Yeah. So I think, here's the thing with Blaney. We're going to know when they unload what he's got. Very rarely does he, not show us something in practice, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, you have a good idea of where Blaney's going to be at. And then Chase Elliott.
He is the exact opposite of Denny Hamlin, where we don't care how he unloads a mile and a half tracks. He typically gets better. But look, Las Vegas was the complete opposite. We thought he was going to be great because he qualified well, practiced well, and then really just didn't have the speed. But maybe that had something to do with him getting shuffled back in the field and couldn't navigate his way through.
That was kind of shocking. Chris Gabehart doesn't make many bad decisions. That was a really bad decision to keep him.
The two tires did not work for him when he got stuck.
It was 2 tires and then no tires.
Yeah.
We saw this last year at this Vegas race. Martin Truex Jr. did the same thing. James Small left him out there on no tires. Whoops. That's a problem. That is a ticket to the back. And that's exactly what happened. So to finish off with Chase Elliott, 40-1, he has a better chance to win at Martinsville. This is not a strong track for him this week.
No.
I feel like you can just kind of plug and play him at the kind of that 15th place spot finish. We haven't seen him have the speed like we've seen in these other cars, the 24 and the 5 and that Hendrick camp. So, if I'm looking at this odds board and I'm trying to pick off something, if you like a guy like Reddick, Hamlin, Blaney, or Elliott, I would say don't put a full position there. You need to probably put a full position or split that full position between them winning the race this week and then split the rest of that with the championship, because I do think it'll probably take a win for Tyler Reddick. I think maybe Blaney and Hamlin would be guys that, they can win at both places. And then I would wait on Chase Elliott. I don't see him making up a lot of ground. So interesting to see just Logano clinched. I think the only person more shocked than Joey Logano is probably Christopher Bell.
Maybe Alex Bowman.
Oh yeah, maybe Alex Bowman as well. So here we are with a Logano punch ticket. It kind of doesn't surprise me at all somehow, but I would say if you're going to take these long shots, maybe split these bets up between winning the race and the championship.
The guy who I think, if we're talking about the favorites that I'm mildly intrigued by, not Joey Logano, as you mentioned. I'm not sure I'd back Christopher Bell at 5-2. Even if we see a scenario where if the best 4 drivers make it to Phoenix, Bell could go off right around 6-5, thereabouts. The same with Kyle Larson, more or less, as co-favorites in that plus 120, plus 130 range. Would actually be William Byron, because I know we haven't talked a lot about the 24 when it comes to winning races, and it feels as though it's been an eternity since he's driven his car into victory lane, but he's quietly stringing together good performance after good performance. And we'll get to, how we see this race playing out at Homestead this weekend, but the 24, second at Kansas, third at Dega, third at the Roval, fourth at Las Vegas. And this 4-race stretch has been his best stretch of the season, going all the way back to, race 6 at COTA, where he won the race, went first, 7th, first, third, and 7th from COTA through Martinsville, Texas, and Talladega back then. So I wouldn't sleep on the 24. I don't know if 5-1's enough to get me there, but I would be intrigued if that number drifted a touch. He went into Martinsville in a good points position, but the unfortunate reality of it is if we get one of the drivers that's already shorter price than him, a Christopher Bell or a Kyle Larson to win, the number on Byron's going to shorten. The only way waiting to bet Byron becomes an attractive proposition is if Chase Elliott or Denny Hamlin happen to win, and his path to try and get there gets to be more difficult based on points.
Right. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head there with Byron. His odds are going to be more dependent upon whether Bell and Larson advance. If Bell doesn't advance, Byron at 5-1 is a great price. But if Bell advances, 5-1 it might be slight value if you guarantee him into the Final Four, but that's just not there. We're not there yet. So there were some stale lines hung on Chris Bell. Anything 4-1 or greater, I would go ahead and jump on that. I don't know if there's anything else out there, but there were a couple of locals that hung that, 4.5-1 price. So
I can't remember. And this will be the last thing before we kind of wave the green, white checkered flag on stage 1 and head into stage 2. Did most shops post updated odds to win the championship after practice and qualifying last weekend in Vegas?
No, they post the same. They post the same odds. So that's a good point. There's no reason to do it now. You can wait till after practice and qualifying.
Okay.
For that to happen, or even race day. Tune into the pre-race poll. We'll have a discussion, and maybe that's a good time to, especially if it is a guy like Hamlin, Reddick, Blaney. you can go ahead and, or Elliott, if they look good, go ahead and sprinkle. Not only do you sprinkle some of that win bet, but also some of the championship. So I think especially if it's in a must-win guy, you cash that ticket if you can. Like if he needs to win to get in, you might as well cash the ticket and then provide yourself a little bit of value with the championship future as well.
Makes a ton of sense. And for all of that NASCAR insight that you get from now until they crown a champion early November, you can follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board podcast related, from your NASCAR needs to the NFL and college football, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And when we head into stage 2, Worm, we go to a 1.5 mile track for the second consecutive week. Going to be a little bit different than what we saw at Vegas because no one is going to take 2 tires, or at least I don't think. No one is going to decide to stay out under yellow and try and make 4 tires with 30 to 40 laps of wear work, given what we see at Homestead from a high tire wear standpoint, and a little bit bittersweet knowing that this race will not be in the playoffs next year when the schedule gets reconfigured. So we'll focus on the playoff drivers first and foremost. We can go back and look at some of the drivers that could potentially crash the party as well, but we'll kick things off with the shortest driver on the board in terms of price. That, of course, being Kyle Larson at 3-1, who does have 2 wins in his last 5 races, 4 finishes, 11th or better during that span. Season numbers outstanding. He has typically been one of the best performers at high-speed intermediate tracks, high-speed, high tire wear. Check, check. 3 of the last 4 races at high tire wear intermediates going back to last year. Larson's ranked number 1 when it comes to speed. Driver rating, over 107 of 8 trips to Homestead. I remember the days when we used to get Kyle Larson at 8-1, 10-1, and 12-1 when he was racing for Chip Ganassi Racing. No longer the case, but are you running to bet Kyle Larson at 3-1 before we see how he unloads?
Well, last week we had discussed that Kyle Larson's probably just going to be 3-1 all weekend. It doesn't matter how he looks in practice. I would go ahead and say the same this week. He could look great in practice. He's probably going to be right in that 3-1 range. He could qualify well, stay right in that 3-1 range. This is books just basically taking a stance saying, we really don't want Kyle Larson money. And I don't blame him. He's been strong here, but last week, I do think that there were some advantages to fading him. He did not have the same speed. If you listen to his interviews at Las Vegas, he said it was not going to be as easy as it had been in years past. I think that, his speed showed up on the stopwatch at Vegas the last 2 years. It just didn't show up this year. So, I don't know. Kyle Larson, of course he can win at Homestead.
Kyle Larson can win anywhere. It doesn't matter where we go. Kyle Larson can win. It's a question of if the price is or the juice is worth the squeeze.
Yeah, 3-1 at a cup race, I think rarely worth the squeeze. If I'm not even say, you can't even say like must win scenario. Maybe he's 3-1. That's value because these guys are trying to win every week. I know that NASCAR can be a little different where once you've advanced, if you're in the top 3, you can just kind of sit back and say, okay, I'm not going to do anything to my tires, save my car. But yeah, Larson can win. 3-1 is too short for me. I'm not interested at this point. It would be, I would have to see some spectacular laps in practice for me to endorse Kyle Larson at 3-1. However, if you just start the week saying, hey, I'm going to bet Kyle Larson, I'm going to put X amount of dollars on Kyle Larson, that's my bet for the week. That is also an option. I don't hate that as well, but it's really hard to protect that 3-1 and be profitable.
The reality of it is I wanted to fade Kyle Larson last week in some of his head-to-head matchups. The driver that I identified was Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick had a faster car. Tyler Reddick tickets would not have cashed if I had chosen to back the 45 over the 5, despite it not being a clean race for him by any stretch of the imagination. And speaking of the 45, his price at Tyler Reddick at 5-1, playoff form-wise, 6 straight races now 11th or worse. So he has not been the model of consistency or starting to string things together. Came home 35th last weekend at Vegas. His average finish outside the top 20 over the last 5 races. But again, we can make the case that he was indeed the fastest car. In terms of how he's performed at Homestead, last 4 trips here, he's got a 3rd, he's got a 35th, he's got a 2nd, and a 4th. Collected stage points in both of them last year before coming home where he did. Shown speed at high tire wear tracks. When the high line comes in, we know he'll do his rim riding like he always does. Tyler Reddick at 5-1. Buy, sell, or hold?
Well, at that price, I'm I'm not interested. I was a buyer at 7, so anything higher than that. There were a few places, gosh, some of the legal shops were in that 8.5, 9-1 range. Yeah, that's go ahead and nibble some of that. I think Tyler Reddick's going to be there, and I think that he has to be in a must-win situation because of Martinsville. I do not think Denny Hamlin is in that same position because he does have some success at Martinsville. He could go out there and score max points at Martinsville, and that could get him in. Whereas Tyler Reddick, I just don't see that happening. This is kind of a must-win for him. And what track would you rather go to if you're Tyler Reddick? I think that this is one of the oval that fits him the best and was arguably the best car last week. I think it's hard to discount anything Chris Bell did wrong at all. So let's just say it was a second best car. He forced it, but I think he was also in kind of a must-win scenario last week as well. He hadn't done what he needed to do in recent weeks to kind of put himself in position. He wasn't scoring stage points. So on a restart last week, he forces it because that was his only chance to beat Chris Bell. Once Chris got clean air, he wasn't going to be able to pass him. So, there's a lot of people that are very critical of Tyler Reddick, but you got to go get it when you have a chance. And that was a restart starting, kind of right in that 10th-ish place like him and Bell did when they took 4 tires. You had to do it. So Reddick will not find himself in that position this week where you're going to have a tire differential on a restart. That's just not going to happen. I think that where I look for Tyler Reddick to be fast is that last 15 or 20% of the run. He also went back and watched the race last year. Sneaky good finish when he was kind of nowhere all day long. But when he actually puts his car up there on the boards, he can be really fast, but he also can make a lot of mistakes. So he tends to kind of run the middle to the mid-high line most of the race. But when push comes to shove, when the green flag waves for stage 3, I anticipate Tyler Reddick to be right up there on the wall and fast. Again, don't like 5-1. If you have anything over 7, that's where we made our move.
It is interesting too, because when I looked at the race times, I think that's something that has to be factored in. I was figuring this race was going to go off at 3:30 Eastern, but no, we're at the traditional 5:30 Eastern slot. So you will get some of those track changes in that hot Miami sun where the track can cool down and things will be a little bit different with track temps, much like we grew accustomed to when this was the championship race. So something to keep in mind because the car will go through a couple of changes there, even in the 400 miles that these guys will run. Talked a lot about Christopher Bell and him having the best car last week. Playoff form-wise, 7th or better each of the last 5 races. He has been the model of consistency. Average playoff finish better than 6th over his last 5 races. His average finish is better than 5th. Since the Brickyard, 10 finishes of 7th or better. And of course, like we said, probably the car to beat last weekend. High tire wear intermediates, he hasn't been as good as the Kyle Larsons and Tyler Reddicks of the world, but there's no doubt Christopher Bell will be formidable, and that's part of the reason we've seen his number on the move as well, from where it was 8 or 9-1 on the open, now sitting in that 6-1 range.
I think Chris Bell, a lot of his value you can derive early in the week. That 8-1 price was, I thought, kind of where we made a little bit of a move because you anticipate him qualifying well, and he's great out front. You somehow went from 20th in stage 2 last year to winning the race. He just kind of figures it out. And I anticipate Chris Bell to be in the mix. And I think he advances to the Final Four. I think he can do that by winning or just running solidly. So I do think that, he might not go out there and dominate like we saw in Las Vegas, but I anticipate him to kind of be around that top 4 all day long. You get him on a late race restart, anything can happen. And also, I do think that this 20 car on 1.5-mile tracks has been faster this year than it was last year. So although I would not put him in the same league as Reddick or Kyle Larson, I think that there's just enough speed in that 20 car that he could hold off anybody if he gets out front.
Steeman, William Byron, 8-1, the going rate on us. Reference to any given Sunday that did not exactly land the way I drew it up in my head. 4 straight top 4 finishes, an average playoff finish, a very, very good last 5 races. We're talking about him finishing on average inside the top 6. High tire wear intermediates, Byron, second best track type total speed ranking, an impressive average finish inside the top 4 when we back out a couple of the outliers there. Over the last 4 races, I mean, Byron has the best average finish, driver rating of 110 plus his last 3 trips to Homestead, and that includes 159 laps led during that particular span. 8-1 on the 24. Look, I've made worse bets in my life than this.
Hard to hate this guy. When you actually dig into the numbers, the last 3 races at Homestead, he actually is number 1 in average running position. He's actually better than Kyle Larson when it comes to average running position. Was kind of a shock. His driver rating is 123.5.
Pretty good.
That is incredible.
It's higher than my IQ.
Well, without a question. I don't know.
My IQ is kind of in the Austin Dillon driver rating range, like 83.4 thereabouts.
Maybe the Kyle Busch this year, maybe. I just, for whatever reason, I haven't seen him have race winning speed, and that's why I don't like 8-1. I certainly think he's going to be around the front all day, but maybe with no threat to win, if that makes sense. Definitely someone you like in matchups. We learned the hard way, taking Denny Hamlin over him. If only we had just taken Chris Bell against him, that would have been a rocking chair win. I expect Mr. Consistent William Byron to just go out there and run a very solid race, score stage points in both stages, and be there to compete for the win. I think the reason we're going to wait on Byron is just like we did last week, is we did see his odds float a little bit to go off at that 13-14-1 range. We could see the same this week, especially if you see Larson, Bell, Reddick qualify up front like they did last week. So that's why we're waiting on Byron. I don't see him going off at 3, 4, 5-1 in this current field.
Ryan Blaney, 8-1. When we try and identify how Blaney ran here last year, started 10th, finished 3rd in stage 1, won stage 2, led 53 laps, earned the top overall driver rating, was the fastest car late in a run, and had one of a top 5 total speed ratings. So the 12 car, to your point, we saw him unload, look extremely sporty in practice at Darlington. You have to imagine it's a similar mindset and a similar machine that they're going to bring to Homestead. 8-1 intrigue you, or again, another guy, hey, look, it's a good number. He'll be competitive, but we think we can get this on the drift. Yeah,
I think he's going to drift. He went off 20-1 last year, or didn't go off. He went off at 6-1. He opened at 20-1 earlier in the week, and so that just goes to show you that his history at Homestead isn't great. However, with the right car, he can drive through the field, and that's what he did. And I thought the most impressive part of that entire race last year was he ran down Larson from 3 seconds back to win stage 2. So this wasn't a fluke. This is something that, there was no strategy involved. It was just flat out racing, and it was running down Kyle Larson at Homestead from 4 seconds back. I don't care who you are. That's impressive. And maybe he's turned the corner a little bit on these higher tire wear tracks. Like I said, I wish we had a chance to see him at Darlington this year because he did look strong at practice. I wish we had seen him a little bit more last week at Las Vegas, but I just think that this number has a top 3 type car baked in with that price, and I just can't get there yet. I'd rather see practice and qualifying. Blaney's not going to go off much shorter than 8-1. I just don't see it with the way that I anticipate these Chevys and these Toyotas qualifying.
The 11 car of Denny Hamlin, priced at 10-1. There's always a chance that Denny Hamlin can run well at mile and a halves, but we talk about drivers where we haven't seen a lot of speed lately. I think Hamlin's kind of become the poster child for that. He hasn't finished better than 4th yet this postseason. His last 5 races, no finish better than 4th, but no finish worse than 14th. So he's kind of been mediocre, would be the word that I would use to describe him. 3-time winner at Homestead. Last year's result was an outlier, but the results have been spotty at best. I mean, we go through some of the data at Homestead. 30th here last year. He was obviously much better than a 30th place car. 7th the year before, 11th. He did win the race here 4 years ago, but a 10th, a 12th, a 9th, and a 9th. And I think what stands out to me, Werme, is he hasn't registered a driver rating at Homestead above 92 over the last 3 trips here, but he's being priced based on pedigree, name recognition, and in my opinion, overvalued, at least before we see how the 11 goes out there and races in practice.
Yeah, I would agree. If the drivers that have just a better average running position over the last 3 races, they're William Byron, Kyle Larson, Martin Truex Jr., Brad Keselowski, AJ Allmendinger, Ryan Blaney, Austin Dillon, and then Denny Hamlin. So there's there's guys that typically run, worse at mile and a half typically throughout the season that have a better driver or running average running position than Denny Hamlin. And I know he's won here 3 times. That was a different car, different package, and I don't think Denny feels like he's going to be in a must-win situation. He just needs to have solid runs, but overvalued, in my opinion. Last week we saw him kind of stay right around in that. I guess, he's opened at 10-1, dropped to 7 or 8-1 after practice and qualifying, which was the best he's looked all year.
And he admitted that an action's detrimental. He goes, look, I don't worry if we practice poorly, but if we practice well, I'm pretty optimistic about our ability to go out there and win the race on Sunday. Well,
I agreed with him, and we were wrong. That's for sure. So I would say, again, wait on Denny. Outside of those, the Reddick, Bell, I guess you could throw Byron in there. And Reddick, I don't see guys getting much shorter until we hit some drivers kind of more mid to higher odds guys.
That is a fair assessment. We mentioned the 11 and what his prospects for victory look like this weekend. Then we get into the other 2 remaining playoff drivers. Chase Elliott, modestly priced at 16-1. Joey Logano, a long shot this weekend in terms of the way odds makers view the 22 car at 30-1. I mean, Chase Elliott, we talked about him not showing race-winning speed for extended stretches this season. It's the same storyline playing out right now. And when we try and identify how Chase Elliott has run at Homestead specifically, his average finish at this track is 10.4, second among active drivers. He's never finished outside the top 15 in 8 starts, but that's allowed him to have the good average finish, even if he hasn't really been in contention to go out there and win the race. Meanwhile, for Joey Logano, finish 18th or worse in 3 of the last 4 trips to Homestead, 8th last year, 18th, 25th, 27th. He can go out there, he can sip a cocktail on South Beach, maybe get a little bit of prime 112 in the system, poppy steak, whatever tickles his fancy. But I can't see the 22 going out there and dusting the field box to wire.
Yeah, I will say this. He probably exceeds expectations, but expectations are pretty damn low. This team is just doing everything they can do to find speed at the mile track at Phoenix these next 2 weeks. I'm not saying that they're throwing in the towel, but oh man, they're sleeping like babies in that 22 camp, and it's hard to get behind him. Just because you're not going to be able to run 71 green flag laps here. You could do it with fuel, but you're going to get your ass run down a hell of a lot faster than you did last week at Las Vegas. So I don't know. I don't know where that 2022 team is at. Like I said, they'll probably exceed expectations, but the expectations are quite low. When it comes to Chase Elliott, I'm just going to kind of single out the last 3 races in this car. Driver rating of 80, not that good. Average starting spot is 10th, and average finish is 14th. And he's been very consistently 14th, and 15th. Average running position of 13th. Not a strong track for Chase Elliott, in my opinion. Will he be solid and kind of consistent all day? Probably. But again, week in and week out, I find myself going back to the fact that they just don't seem like they have race-winning speed. They can start 18th or 19th and work their way into the top 10, but once they get in the top 10, that's kind of where they settle into, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th place and really don't go anywhere from there. So not a great track for Chase, especially in the next-gen car, albeit all top 15 finishes.
I'm very interested to see where the 9 car opens up when we go to Martinsville, if it's a must-win situation for him, because that has been the playground of sorts for HMS, and we saw the 24 of William Byron put together a very good run in the spring. So it'll be fascinating to try and see, and how far Elliott's price could potentially drift if, say, he's 50 points short of the cut line, and what he would need to make that happen, and then find a way into the Final Four at Phoenix. Other drivers that have caught your eye potentially that could crash the party from the outside looking in the playoff picture. I know we hit on a few last weekend, and lo and behold, Martin Truex, welcome back to competition at a mile and a half track. Didn't shoot himself in the foot, had a car that was fast, went out there and raced clean, and drove home comfortably inside the top 10.
Yeah, I guess there are some people out there that think that Truex kind of started that whole debacle with the 9 and the 45. However, that was just the 45 fitting it in there, if you ask me. Old Marty's been strong here. When Larson got out to his 10 or 11-second leads a couple of years ago, there was only one car that had any chance of catching him, and that was the 19 and Martin Truex Jr. Started here on the pole last year. His average running position is 6.7. That's third behind just William Byron and Kyle Larson. We've seen anywhere from 18. I saw a 20 out there on Martin Truex Jr. Again, I think I only like him in the outright market. I can't get behind him in matchups, but with that outright price comes these great top 5 and top 10 prices that almost feel like you just got to nibble. I think that if he has just a solid run, you can't
get behind him in matchups. You say, huh, Worm? You can't get behind the 19 in matchups.
Well, I'm more fading one driver. You know what? I can't get behind it. You know what, Todd? You got me in a real pickle here.
More on that a little bit later in the program, as Chris does everything he can to backpedal. Potentially.
I will say this. I will say this about Martin Truex Jr. If he is in the playoffs, I do think Martin Truex Jr. is like a 7 or 8 to 1 type
100%.
driver. He's been an absolute afterthought.
6 to 1, 8 to 1. He's being priced like William Byron or Ryan Blaney, if not slightly shorter.
Yeah, I just think Truex, gosh, that win price is so good. And because of that, he's priced properly, I guess, across the board. The one thing that we don't know with Martin Truex Jr. is where his head's at. It was nice to see him running fast laps last week. I was wondering who was going to step up after the 45, the 6, the 9 were all out of the race, and Larson as well. I'm like, gosh, who's it going to be? And sure enough, when it was Martin Truex Jr. and I was naked on him, I was very nervous because all of a sudden this guy shot out of a cannon and it's kind of chasing our Chris Bell down. So I think that there's a ton of value on Truex, and man, even that 18 to 1 price, it's hard to get over Martin Truex Jr. on a 1.5 mile track at 18 to 1.
Any other guys that you think are mildly intriguing, whether it's, Chris Buescher, Brad Kay, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Alex Bowman?
Yeah.
Not requiring a deep dive, but just wanted to throw those guys out there.
I think this is one of Brad Keselowski's better tracks. And from a couple angles, I do think that he runs well here. I think that he finds speed, whether it's running the bottom or the top. He's able to make passes. But the other thing, too, is he's qualified well here, something we don't say very often about Brad Keselowski. So he's qualified over the last 3 races, 7th, 9th, and 4th. And I think it was you that was saying, had a stat earlier today about how well he's qualified here.
It's been incredible. I'll let you continue to talk while I filibuster to try and find the exact number.
The other thing, too, about Brad is even when RFK Racing wasn't kind of that top tier stuff when he first joined or first got into this 6 car, he was able to work his way through the field. I think he was 20 to 1 to be top 4, and he was running 3rd or 4th at one time. So I do think that Brad Keselowski is going to be up front all day. If you look back at some of the places where he's had speed this year, go back to Darlington, a place that I would say not a direct track comp, but very similar. And we saw him win earlier this year. I anticipate this driver of RFK to be quite fast all day long.
Yeah, driveraverages.com, one of the better NASCAR resources out there when you're looking at a quick snapshot for how drivers have finished, how they've started, and sometimes more importantly, how they've raced during the course of the race. Going all the way back to November of 2011, Worm, this is where Keselowski has started at Homestead. 5th, 3rd, 4th, 4th, 8th, 2nd, 5th, 4th, 8th, 3rd, 7th, 9th, 4th. And this is a driver that hasn't qualified all that well in the grand scheme of things. Somehow can put together one fast lap regardless of what car he's driving around this high tire track.
Yeah, the other 2 drivers I want to talk about would be, our boy Austin Dillon. There's a lot of top 10 love here. I don't hate Austin Dillon top 10. Do not play this price anything less than 4 to 1. I don't think that that's necessary. The secret's kind of out. Last year, I remember seeing a tweet. I don't remember who it was. That he was driving so hard that it's almost like Austin Dillon bet himself to finish in the top 10.
Yeah, we don't need those kind of rumors circulating throughout NASCAR with the legal operators that are now prominently displayed on the sides of most rides in the Cup Series.
Yeah, and then the other guy, AJ Allmendinger, he's run twice here. His average finish is 4th. He's got a 3rd and a 5th. The secret's out though. The top 10 price is kind of that, plus 230. That's pretty short for a guy that's not full time, and I would say that 16 hasn't been the same as it's been in years past. So, if you like AJ Allmendinger, absolutely go for it. I anticipate him running well, but that price is a little shorter than it should be, in my opinion.
I am currently perusing.
And now I got to walk back this Truex shit.
We'll get there. We'll get there in a second. I'm currently perusing
gosh.
some prices, trying to find the 4-1 you mentioned on Christopher Bell to win the championship, and if that becomes the first championship bet I made. Although I am extremely tempted, as we discuss things, to back Tyler Reddick at a price tag at 25-1, maybe a little William Byron. I may end up with 3 championship outright picks going into the race this weekend at Homestead. But you can follow Chris and his backtracking on social media at Chris Werme 15. You can follow me there as well at Todd Fuhrman. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Green, white, checker flag officially waved on stage 2. Stage 3, rather brief. Chris, you are a master wordsmith. You love to put your foot in your mouth.
You.
Are you going to continue down the path I thought we were going to go down before the show started, or are you going to recant and completely call an audible at the line of scrimmage?
No, we're going to stick with this. I like Martin Truex Jr. I don't know. I said I don't like him in matchups, but I've already played him in matchups. So, I don't know if I'm completely irrelevant now as a podcaster, but
that happened long before the show started. Don't kid yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I think it's also important at why on the pre-race poll is sometimes my picks are different than my skin in the game. And I think that's why I started saying like, hey, here's who I think is going to win. But ultimately I have the most money on this particular driver. And I have faded one particular driver in matchups, and that's William Byron. And then one of those guys, or not William Byron, Chase Elliott, that's with Martin Truex Jr. And I like that minus 125 at Caesars. Truex is going to be fast. The thing that's bit him has just been mistakes. If it's early in the race, he could easily recover. I think there's plenty of speed there and enough talent behind the wheel. If it's late in the race, it's going to be a problem. But ultimately, if you just look at our luck over the last 6 or so weeks, we haven't had anything wrong happen to the guys we faded. So
no, we have not been on the right side of race variance, but unfortunately it's keeping with the theme across college and the NFL as well. Best bets across all 3 sports that we profess to be experts on and cover extensively and bet real substantial sums of money on. Yeah. The gambling gods have not smiled kindly upon us. Last week, at least we got our money in at a great price at a pick'em or minus $1.20 in our head-to-head. You told folks on the pre-race poll, should they so choose to scalp, you could have made 40 to 50 cents on the dollar. So that's the only silver lining there. But it doesn't excuse, the Denny Hamlin head-to-head matchup where he faded William Byron. So it happens from time to time. But, yep.
I feel like this whole year I haven't put my foot in my mouth like that. And here we are. Well, my favorite track.
Some drivers choke under pressure, and you're a podcaster choking under pressure with 3 races
come on in the round of 8, and all of a sudden, no, I like Truex. I just don't like Chase Elliott, to be completely honest.
Joey Logano winning has you completely flummoxed over there.
Well, no, I don't. No, I just flummoxed myself. That's the problem here, Todd. And I'm glad you didn't.
Not that kind of podcast, Chris. It's not that kind of podcast. I know, this is an all ages show.
No, hey, I actually do like Truex. I have money on him, so I don't know what else I can say. And that's a good price. I think that thing only gets longer. I think we're going to beat the market there. Truex showed some speed last week. This is one of his best tracks. The fact that he was the only guy that can compete with Larson 2 years ago, put it in the poll here last year, showed some speed last week at Las Vegas. I like where this 19 car is at. And I'd love to see him win, to be completely honest. I think that'd be a great thing for the sport. Unfortunately, I don't think At this point in the week, you can pinpoint him as a driver to win the race, but the price is nice, and I certainly like that matchup over Chase Elliott.
We just have to find out from people at JGR what Martin Truex Jr. has on his race weekend itinerary. I figure down in South Florida, there's a little bit of deep sea fishing. Maybe he's out there to try and catch a marlin, put his mind at ease, and go out there and dust the field from start to finish to try and be able to get this matchup home comfortably for us.
Well, I think he could go down there and deep sea fish. He's raced this track plenty of times. He's won a championship there. I think he's going to be strong. So it doesn't matter if he practices. I don't even care what I see in practice out of Truex. This is one of those tracks where you're either kind of good here or you aren't. I think that if you have a good enough race car, you can go out there and race for the win. But these drivers that once they're able to work on their car through stage 1, stage 2, the communication, these crew chiefs, they're great. And even though the car wasn't good early in the race last year, when it came to Christopher Bell, they were able to get it right. And he was able to drive that thing to victory lane. So, it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I do think that the race does start at 2:30, Todd. I don't know what you're talking about. At least that's what it says on J-Ski.
I'm seeing 2:30. Oh, maybe my odd screen is screwed up. I'm seeing 2:30, which I assume was Pacific time, but maybe it's 2:30 Eastern that the odd screen isn't updated correctly.
I have 2:30 Eastern.
Yeah, right. Then this is what happens when I trust the odd screen. That is the lifeblood of everything we do. That would make a little bit more sense given the fact that if it started at 2:30 Pacific time, which is 5:30 Eastern, and they put it on NBC, that would run right into Sunday Night Football between the 49ers and Cowboys. So, all right, I retract my statement there. I apologize for my inaccuracy. It's not quite like saying, hey, look, I wouldn't bet this guy in matchups and then giving him out 8 minutes later in a head-to-head, but I completely digress.
Yeah. Well, that's why you tune in. And I'm glad you called me out. I like Truex. Like I said, I bet money on it. So
there we go. And speaking of tuning in, we may have a special announcement for the regular season finale, or I should say the season finale of Stay Green. And we'll share a little bit more details once Chris and I can potentially iron that out in anticipation of the race at Phoenix. So we'll see what we can do. Maybe the first ever live Stay Green show on Wednesday. So for all of our loyal listeners, if they want to contribute times, I'm thinking, 8 Eastern may have that sweet spot. We'll have to work on some of the details, see if we can get the logistics handled accordingly, since I know the show goes live on Fridays, but we record on Wednesday, so we can do a live version there and podcast form on Fridays, allowing folks to get the best of the number. And you'll be encouraged to tune in live. Maybe we'll offer up a little bit more than one best bet, but something to keep on the calendars. If you, our loyal listeners, have some feedback, let us know what time might work best on Wednesday, whether it's 8 Eastern, 7 Eastern. Chris and I have a little bit of flexibility most of the time.
Yep. All I have to say is go Truex.
All right. On that note, we appreciate all you guys and girls tuning in to Stay Green. We appreciate your support as always. Remember, rate, review, subscribe to all things Bet the Board. Be able to share and post through your social media channels. The more listeners, the better it is for the brand. The more people we can get in front of and hopefully allow us to do some special things above and beyond the next 2 race previews we have coming up after this. So for Chris Werme, I am Todd Fuhrman. Most importantly, this weekend we go to Homestead with a Martin Truex head-to-head matchup ticket in hand over Chase Elliott. We'll see you at the window.